Sometimes I think we humans get a few things a little backwards. We have a very definite Christmas season that has seemed to get longer and longer and longer. And generally, I at least kind of and the general feel is wake up to the fact that Easter was yesterday almost. Christmas is absolutely necessary. You couldn't have Easter without Christmas. But Christmas would mean nothing. Nothing would mean nothing for us without Easter. So today I chose to not ignore, but maybe bypass the quarterly. You can read the lesson. You can get a leaflet if you don't have a quarterly. There may even be a few extra quarterlies back there if you need one to take with you. You're perfectly capable of reading the lesson and the comments that are there. But a number of years ago, I had the blessed privilege of studying for 3 weeks in Israel after taking a course in seminary called Lands of the Bible, and then went to the Lands of the Bible. And sometime after that, perhaps, that gave me a little better feel or awareness of what happened through this week that we are commemorating starting this morning. And from that, at least sometimes through the Holy Week, I have thought more consciously of what was happening day by day. And you may well know this perfectly. You may do that every year. But I find that for myself, a refresher every now and then is useful. So I'm going to invite us today to join Jesus on his journey through Holy Week. Actually, I believe our Catholic, whether you want to call them brothers or sisters, I don't know, but they do a better job of commemorating Holy Week than we do. Of course, we would have some issues, and I believe some legitimate issues with some of their thinking and some of the way they may join it or celebrate it, remember it. But I think we could do well to, even if we can't change our society, to get the same emphasis on Easter that we have on Christmas. Of course, we wouldn't want it to have all of the emphasis, the commercialized, and that's the other sad thing. Probably what is known most about Christmas is not, or about Easter is not what we should be focusing on. Even if there are some distant tie-in between eggs and Easter. We need to remember Easter and Holy Week. And so to tie it in with the lesson in the quarterly, it is the pain that Jesus willingly accepted, engaged, suffered, that gives us that and the following resurrection. And by the way, Easter without resurrection, or Good Friday without Resurrection Sunday, would be meaningless as well. That's what provides us any hope of redemption. And it's more than just any hope. It is through him. And as we trust in him, surrender to him, absolute certainty. So we'll have an opening prayer, and then we will join Jesus on his journey through Holy Week. Brother Stroop, would you lead us in the opening prayer, please?
Thank you, Lord Jesus, this morning that we can be in your house. Thankful, Lord, for every blessing you bestow upon us. Pray, our Lord, now that you would help us as we go through this lesson, dear Jesus. Help Brother McDowell as he teaches us today. Help us, oh God, to be attentive to the truth. Work out your plans and your purpose, Lord. We pray this day for Jesus' sake. Amen.
And so I don't totally forget it. Almost. The events of Holy Week occurred around Jerusalem, and everything that's on, well, not quite everything, but a summary of everything that's on these pages can be seen in a shorter graphic that has the 8 days of Holy Week, from today, Palm Sunday, to a week from today, Easter Sunday. These events happened in and around Jerusalem. Come on now. There we go. And it's very helpful to know a little bit. I'm sorry, this is not bigger. You can feel free to get your binoculars out. It's helpful to know a little bit about the topography of Jerusalem, how Jerusalem is laid out. And Jerusalem has a long history, and it has been different at different times of its history. The original Jerusalem, the city of David, is actually that little long extension there, or the bottom part of that long part, kind of in slightly right to the middle, with the Temple Mount later added by Solomon on the north of that. This is no doubt the Mount Moriah that we read of in the Old Testament, or very possibly where Abraham was going to offer Isaac. Jerusalem the city itself is one of the highest cities, geographically or elevation-wise, and it's a bunch of hills and valleys. And so the green areas are valleys. You've heard of the Kidron Valley to the east of the city of Jerusalem. That's the long vertical green strip clear to the right. Then around the bottom, and it continues on farther south, then around the bottom and up the side is the Hinnom Valley, where Ahaz, I believe it was, burned, or perhaps Manasseh burned their children in that valley. It was the refuge dump, and the word for valley in Hebrew is Geh, and so it becomes Gehinnom, or the valley of Gehenna. And that is one of the words used in the New Testament. That's the Greek form of it. One of the words used in the New Testament for hell, because it was the refuge dump where, number one, refuge was dumped and burned. The dung gate was on the south there. But it was also known for those awful atrocities that were committed in the name of religion, in worship to a god, of even burning children there. And so it's a fitting picture for the eternal fires of hell. Probably the fires there in the dump never went out. The Valley of Gehenna, on the middle there's a north-south valley that's called the Tyropean Valley, that separates the city of David from the western city and the upper city that was added later. And then there's a little valley across called the Transversal Valley, because it goes transverse. Jesus has been down, coming from Galilee, headed toward Jerusalem. He was passed through Jericho, and you can read about Zacchaeus, you can read about the healing of the blind Bartimaeus, as he is headed toward what he knows to be his final week of life on this earth, or at least, well, that's not the end of this. In fact, he knew it from the beginning. He came into the world with that purpose. He would go up then from Jericho. Do you remember the story of the Good Samaritan? A man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho. That's because geographically you can't do anything but go down from Jerusalem to Jericho, or up from Jericho to Jerusalem. Jericho's down in the Jordan Rift Valley. It is close to the mouth or the north shore of the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea is the lowest spot on earth. almost 1,300 feet below sea level, and Jerusalem is a mountain, not a super high mountain, but a mountain. So you have to go down from Jerusalem to Jericho. Jesus would have come up that route. That road from Jericho to Jerusalem passes through Bethany, goes over the Mount of Olives, which is on the east side of that Kidron Valley, across from Jerusalem. And that's where he would have been going this day on Palm Sunday, as no doubt he was already perhaps at Bethany, or at least someplace along there. Probably didn't come clear from Jericho that day. But he's headed toward Jerusalem. This would be the day after the Jewish Sabbath and what we know as Palm Sunday. There's another town close to Bethany called Bethphage. He sends 2 disciples over there as he's headed into Jerusalem, and tells them that they will find a donkey, actually a donkey and its colt, tied there, loose them, bring him back, and the disciples do that. As they crest the Mount of Olives and start to overlook Jerusalem, people who know about the raising of Lazarus that would have happened fairly recently as well in Bethany are coming out to meet him. News gets around, you know that. And they are coming to meet him, and somehow they get the idea that maybe by seeing him, his disciples have spread their cloaks on the donkey. Jesus is sitting on the donkey. We aren't used to think of donkeys and kings. We think more of white stallions and kings, or these days other things and kings, carriages and kings, whatever. But these people would have known, number one, kings did sometimes ride donkeys as part of a triumphal procession after a victory. But they would have also known the prophecy in Zechariah that your king comes to you, O Zion, sitting upon a donkey. One way or the other, they get the idea that something special is going on here, and you know the story of Palm Sunday, and if I'm going to get to Easter Sunday today and take the whole journey, I better not put in all the details. And they began crying out to him, Hosanna. But this is overlooking Jerusalem from the Mount of Olives across the Kidron Valley. This is actually on the other side, if you teleport yourself quickly to the other side of Jerusalem, looking from the west across the Temple Mount, where the Dome of the Rock is now, across the Kidron Valley, and on the horizon there, just above the dome, is the Mount of Olives. Mount of Olives is not a single peak, it's more like Jack's Mountain. It's a kind of a range along there. And when we talk about the Kidron Valley, sometimes I didn't get the feel of the depth, but when you look down the valley, this is looking actually up north the valley, you can see there is indeed a valley there that separates Jerusalem and the Mount of Olives. And this is after people who cleansed the temple, like Hezekiah, Josiah. They say the Bible tells us they dumped a bunch of their stuff in the Kidron Valley, but it's still a mighty deep valley. This gives another look. This is looking south down the same valley. That tomb there is called the Tomb of Absalom. Probably isn't the Absalom in the Bible, but it is called that. So that gave me a whole different feel of when I read about the Kidron Valley. It indeed is a deep valley separating those two parts. So he starts down, and this was taken from a video. I love, by the way, the link to that video is on the very end of your handout, and some other resources that I found useful. So this was the guide in the in the video. I would love to have time to listen to it, but we don't. This is, at least traditionally, and in fact today, no doubt, there are pilgrims who are gathered there and are walking down the valley singing Hosanna and waving palm branches. This may have been Jesus' descent on the donkey into the toward Jerusalem, overlooking Jerusalem, the Temple Mount. Along the way, Luke tells us that Jesus stopped and wept over Jerusalem because Jerusalem didn't know. I mean, they proclaimed him king, but you can tell through the course of the week, they didn't really know that this was their hour of visitation. And this is a church, pretty modern church that has been built there. The name of it means the Lord's weeping, commemorating that event. He goes on down, comes to the temple, looks around, and then leaves that night and goes out to Bethany, which is about 2 miles east, just on the other side of the Mount of Olives, to spend the evening, to spend the night. I wish you could see this a lot better. It is helpful to not only see that general topography of Jerusalem, but also know where things were in Jerusalem. The Temple Mount is the rectangle on the upper right. If you barely see an outline around, dotted line probably, that's the current walls of the old city of Jerusalem, not from the time of Jesus. But then on the far left, there's a slightly gray little rectangle where there's been an indentation in the walls. That's Herod's palace. On the north of very north of the Temple Mount, there's a kind of horizontal little section that is the Fortress Antonia that Herod had built there. The Romans liked it, and he probably liked it too, because it overlooked the Temple Mount, and that way the authorities could be alert on anything that was happening there that they felt needed to be controlled. The lower left is the newer section of the city, perhaps from Hezekiah's time, and Annas' house. If you see the arrow lines, the top one that's pointing, not the very top one. Down there are a couple on the lower left, arrow going up, arrow coming down, pointing to the traditional spot of Annas' house, and then Caiaphas' house, and so forth. Then the Temple Mount itself it's helpful to know what it looks like, but I'd better leave that. Number one, you can't see it, and number two, we don't have time. But the temple itself is the slightly darker gray there, kind of in the middle. And this is actually a large-scale model of Herod's temple that is in a museum there in Jerusalem. It's the whole area might barely fit in the church here. I think it is a large thing that you can walk around and see the court and see the temple. So you can no doubt find a lot of pictures of this, maybe a virtual tour of it online. So Palm Sunday comes to a close. I should mention that some of the things in this layout that I have here, we don't know exactly the timing of them. Part of that is because the gospel stories, at least as we read them on the surface and not maybe knowing all of the thoughts going into it, sound a bit contradictory. I don't believe there are contradictions in the Bible, or even that these are mistakes. I think it's just that, number one, the conventions of writing back then were different than ours. They weren't as concerned about strict detail and order and all of that. So they could be writing a perfectly true account and juggling things. We do that. We take some license these days anyway. This is a totally different, well, I won't go there because of time. But, so it sounds like the order isn't always given exactly the same among the Gospels. So we don't know for sure. This is at least pretty close, and I think enough to give us help. And if we miss something on a day or so, it still happened during this week, but it will give us a basic idea. On Monday morning, sometimes called Holy Monday, Jesus left from Bethany, and this is a modern view of Bethany. The church there is commemorating Lazarus' raising, probably not where he was raised. There's a Muslim site close by here that professes to be the actual. But Bethany, you remember as he was heading back to Jerusalem en route, he's with his disciples, and he's hungry. He goes to get a fig or two, even if it would be green, off the fig tree, doesn't find anything, curses it. He goes on into Jerusalem. He would see this view as he came over the Mount of Olives heading down into Jerusalem. He goes to the temple, and that's part of why I put that slide about the layout of the temple. Sorry that we can't take better advantage of it. If you want the PowerPoint, let me know, and then you can see it a little more closely. And he cleanses the temple for the second time. He did that very early in his ministry. He does it here at the end of his ministry. That doesn't gain him any favors with the Jews, the Jewish leaders, who weren't too favorable to him by this time anyway, because, number one, he wasn't preaching all of their theology. He actually knew theology better than they did, but that doesn't stop us from disagreeing with people that we disagree with or thinking they're wrong. So they thought they were wrong, but the other thing tied very closely with that was his understanding of truth undermined their authority as the ones who told people what truth was. It was threatening their power and authority. They were not happy with that. He does do some healing in the temple. He's done that throughout his ministry. And that day winds down. Doesn't sound like a whole lot on the list here, but he leaves to spend the night again in Bethany. The Bible tells us he was going back and forth through this time. Days teaching in the temple and in Jerusalem, nights out at Bethany. Very likely, very possibly staying with Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, who were his close friends, sisters and brother, out there in Bethany. After that, he comes back in the next day, Holy Tuesday. As he comes back, no doubt the same route, passes by that same fig tree. His disciples are amazed that it's already withered, and that just doesn't happen in the natural, normal way of things happening in nature. And he takes the advantage of the opportunity to teach them about faith. You've noticed that you have the scripture references at the right there. You can check these out on your own. I would encourage you to try to read at least some of these. I think one year I tried to read all of them. That's a little hard. The days aren't expressed as equaled out, the amount of scripture text for each one. So some days you read a long time. But if you can take at least some, I think will help you in your journey with Jesus through Jerusalem. This is his last day of public ministry. And he spends the day in the temple. A whole lot going on in this day. And I won't take the time to go through the different things, but he has all of these interactions. The Jewish authorities have already figured out they got to stop this guy or they're going to lose their authority. And of course, Caiaphas, as the high priest, actually unknowingly, unwittingly gives a prophecy that it is, if we don't stop this, he'll cause an uproar among the people. They'll get confused. There might be division. There'll be a problem. The Romans won't like that, so they will come and take away our nation. And it'd be better for one man to die for the nation than for the whole nation to be destroyed. Well, they've already, kind of like some current history up in New York, at least as some of us understand it, they've already decided the outcome that they want. Now they're just looking for the way to make it happen. So through the day, somebody will come to him from chief priests, elders, with a question and try to trick him up, try to get him in a trap, in a corner where he'll have to do or say something that will give them the occasion they are seeking in order to accuse him. Jesus doesn't get caught in any of their traps, and they finally come to the place where I think King James says, they durst not ask him any more questions. They're just hurting themselves. We'll see if that happens in the New York situation. It seems to be kind of along the way at this point. We'll see. So you can glance down through the things that happened there. The week's going very, very fast, so I will go on. As he leaves the temple, do read a space. I think Brother McMillan spoke on the John 12 passage of his interaction with the Greeks in his discourse after that powerful, powerful time when Jesus says, "My soul's troubled, and what shall I say? Deliver me from this hour." No, this is the hour I came for. Father, glorify your name. And if that can become our attitude, we'll make some progress in being like Jesus. They go out of the temple, they go back across that Kidron Valley, and as they go out, probably late in the day, the sun reflecting, not like the gold dome quite, but reflecting on Herod's temple. Well, the disciples, as they walk out, say, "Look at all of these big stones," and then he gets back over on the Mount of Olives, looks back across Jerusalem, sits down, and his disciples ask him, he tells them, these things are all going to be destroyed, all these, don't get excited about them, they'll all be gone. And so they ask him, when will these things be? He sits down on the mount and gives them those great Olivet discourses, we call them, prophecies, and the parable of the 10 virgins, the parable of the talents, the discourse of the judgment of the nations, and then goes on back over the crest of the Mount of Olives and to Bethany for that night. This would show that's not quite there, sorry. Okay, we'll get there. I think that was, the previous one had that Kidron Valley, maybe. Holy Wednesday, as far as we know, this was a day that he spent in Bethany. Perhaps a time of retirement for sure. He's already had his last day of public ministry. Perhaps a time of recouping, of rest, of preparing himself for what he knew was coming the rest of the week. During that time, perhaps on that day, the Jewish leaders meet again and they say, we have to find a stop to this. We can't do it during the feast because that would really cause an uproar. The people are with us. They just came in shouting hosannas to him as he came in a few days ago. But we have to find a way to put a stop to this. It can't go on any longer. Possibly at this time, maybe the day before in the evening when he got home or got to Mary's and Martha's house. But a woman comes in and anoints his head while he's at Simon the leper's house. And the disciples are concerned about the waste of money. He mentioned, this has been done for my burial. Judas, who has been the treasurer, the group treasurer, and taking advantage of that for his own financial benefit. No doubt for a long time his attitude toward Jesus hiddenly has been changing, and he decides, I'm not going to put up with this either. Something's not right here. I don't agree with this. Apparently that same day he slipped out and went to meet with the Jewish leaders who knows if he showed up right at the time they were meeting discussing that. Makes a good story, but anyway, he gets to them and they are thrilled because that's exactly what they've been wanting to do. And here's a man who said, from the inner group, who says, I can give him to you away from the crowds, so you don't have to wait till the feast is clear over. You can take care of him now without causing the big uproar you were concerned if you went and snatched him out of the middle of the crowd. Jesus spends that night in Bethany, and then we come, to Maundy Thursday, or Holy Thursday. Why is it called Maundy? Well, that actually derives from, maybe through a circuitous route, from the Latin word that mandatus, Spanish we get it mandato. It has the meaning of an order or a command. And so because on this day, Jesus in the upper room gives his disciples the new commandment to love one another, somebody along the way picked that up and started calling this Commandment Thursday, Maundy Thursday, or Holy Thursday. Sometime through the course of the morning, wouldn't have to be super early, Jesus sends Peter and John. They ask him where he wants to eat the Passover. I mean, that's why everybody's there this week. It's Passover week. I guess I should have mentioned that earlier. The Jewish high day, one of the high days of the year, remembering the Passover lamb at the time of the Exodus from under Moses from Egypt. They send, he tells them to go into the city. They'll see a guy there with a water pot, follow him. They'll take him to an upper room where it'll be all largely ready. Prepare the meal there. Later on then, heading toward the evening, he goes with the others of the 12 and starts the Passover meal in that upper room. There is a building there with a room that is not the room in which he ate it, but perhaps at the site and trying to at least commemorate, if probably not replicate either, but commemorate the site where he ate the Passover meal with his 12. Now, during that time, the 12 argue again about who's the greatest. Jesus, I think, is a pretty effective teacher, better even than Brother Mason sometimes. He answers their question verbally, but he also gives a great illustration, as we had illustrations last night, effective illustration. Who's the greatest? And he gets down and washes their feet. During that time, he also says, one of you is going to betray me. They ask, is it I? Is it I? He indicates, though they don't understand, the rest of them don't understand, Judas seems to understand, indicates that it's Judas, tells him what you are doing, go quickly. He also transforms the Passover meal into the Lord's Supper and gives us this great commemorative event that we will participate in, Lord willing, next week, that we call communion. He gives, no doubt after Jesus leaves, he gives his final words to the 12. This is his kind of final private ministry. And the great upper room discourse in John 13 through 16. Then he prays his amazing high priestly prayer in John 17. And they sing a hymn, go back across, leave the upper room, go back across the Jordan Valley, or the Kidron Valley, over into Gethsemane, the place of the Garden of the Olive Press. And these are some of the olive trees. This is the traditional, perhaps the actual site. Some of these trees potentially could have been there. They can live 2,000 years or more, could have been there when Jesus was there. And this is what we look to these days as a remembrance, at least, if not the actual rock where he would have prayed in agony that night. Sometime in that period, one gospel sounds like it's in the upper room, others sound like it might be in the trip over to Gethsemane. He mentions, tells Peter says, I won't deny you. And he says, yes, you will. The disciples sleep while he prays in agony there. I'm afraid I can't criticize them too much. I've been there and done that. Judas comes then and finds him. He's familiar with this spot, brings all of the story, as our president sometimes says. But you do know the story, and I could tell it to you, but I won't take the time. Jesus is arrested there. The disciples, after an attempt to stand up for him, and it ends in the severance of a servant's ear, of the high priest's ear, Malchus's ear. Jesus said, no, you didn't understand me. That's not the way it needs to be. And the disciples, no doubt, out of fear, but out of confusion as well. Their king isn't acting like they expected their king to act. They forsake him. John and Peter at least follow a ways off. And the crowd takes him then, or the crowd and the guards, temple guards no doubt, take him, arrest him, and lead him back across that valley into Jerusalem. Yeah, wrong one. These steps lead from the city of David or Jerusalem, probably even south of the city of David, down to the Kidron Valley. They may be the actual steps that he would have traversed, either going or coming, or perhaps both, from the Garden of Gethsemane. Then he undergoes a series of 6 trials through that night, leading into, and exactly how the order and when it all started. Maybe there's a little bit in the hours that we think of as the night hours and into midnight. Of course, their days would have started not at midnight, but perhaps at 6 in the evening. The traditional long-standing day would have been sundown to sundown would have been the day. First trial would take him to Annas' house, getting the Sanhedrin together. That takes some time. Second trial, and I didn't realize this, Jesus actually did some of his first denying over at Annas' house, so it wasn't all at one place and one time. Send him over to Caiaphas, the current high priest. Annas was the power behind the throne. That sounds like current situation too, maybe. Jesus is condemned, abused there. Peter continues his denials. They condemn him to death illegally. He can't have that during the night hours. So at about 6 o'clock daylight, they convene again and say, make it official. Say, yeah, he's guilty. But they can't kill him, so they send him to Pilate. Stands before Pilate. Pilate declares him innocent. Pilate finds out he's a Galilean, sends him over to Herod. This, by the way, Pilate's probably in Herod's palace over on the west. We often think of him up in Antonia Fortress on the north of the tabernacle or the temple. Probably not, although the Via Dolorosa that you can walk in Jerusalem goes from there. But more likely, Pilate was over in Herod's temple. The Praetorium was over there. Sends him over to Herod, probably in the old Hasmonean palace. Herod just mocks him and can't get him to do what he wanted him to do, so he sends him back over, puts him in a robe like a king, makes fun of him. Pilate does his best, because he knows he's innocent, does his best to free him, but he's too scared for his own position, and he finally says, I'm going to have to condemn him. Well, that's nothing unusual. All of this between 6 and 9 o'clock, someplace in the 9-ish hour around that time, Pilate gives him over to be crucified. He's taken out from there to Golgotha. bearing the cross beam of his cross on his shoulder until he can't carry it anymore. He's already been scourged. He's lost blood. He's in terrible shape. Simon carries it the rest of the way. Get to Golgotha, stretch him on that beam, and nail him to it. Raise the beam to the upright that stands there on Golgotha, along with the two thieves. On the cross, that would happen around 9 o'clock in the morning, the third hour. On the cross then, he suffers for about 6 hours. The first 3, there's daylight. He gives the 7 sayings of the cross, the first 3 there. Around noon, darkness falls until 3, the others of the 7 sayings. At 3, he gives up his spirit. He lays down his life. At the hour when the Passover lambs would be slain in the temple. We can't go any farther than that, and by the way, if you think that can't all happen in this time frame, Jerusalem's a mighty small town. You can walk around the old city in a couple of hours, so you can get in between these places easily in this time frame. They have to have him buried by 6 o'clock because they're coming up on the high holy Sabbath. And they do that. Then on Saturday, Jesus rests in the tomb. His disciples, by the way, those might have been the thorns for his crown. That was Gordon's place of the skull. More likely he was crucified and buried in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Although the garden tomb is a good illustration, object lesson, if nothing else, even if he wasn't there, it gives us an idea of what the tombs were like. The rolling stone. And I'm going to have to leave it at that. My time is more than gone. On Easter Sunday, he proved not only was he willing to give his life so that we could be redeemed, pay the price for our sins, but he was able to conquer death, hell, and the grave. And so, in that garden tomb, again, whether it's the actual spot or not, it would have been something like this. You have the inner chamber, and wherever it was, it's empty today because he lives forever.